two, one.
Welcome to the Daily Objective, day 147 of the war in Israel. I'm joined by Morgan. How's it going, Morgan?
I'm not too bad, all things considered.
So, yesterday's by-election or special election in the Rochdale constituency in England, in Greater Manchester, happened. And sorry, that's my phone unmuted. And George Galloway, as was to be expected, won. Americans who are younger probably don't know who he is, and who are older might not remember him. He is most famous for his career, making a career out of Jew hatred, and for playing a cat on Celebrity Big Brother, as you can see in the thumbnail. But yeah, the cat thing, I don't know. I always wonder if this is one of those things that politicians do to kind of seem not like monsters, but I don't think there's anything this person can do to seem not like a monster. We're going to go into some of that. I actually sometimes I do things in preparation for episodes that I realize are not necessary. Like, for example, watching his YouTube channel, because I know enough about him without needing to watch it, but I did watch some part of one video. I'll get to that later. Morgan, your initial thoughts on this by-election result.
Well, it wasn't surprising, as you say. Part of me was holding out hope that either Simon Janchuk would win, which resoundingly he didn't. He came something like fifth or sixth, or this independent candidate who did quite well, who got about 20% of the vote. But Galloway won, as the bookies predicted, and they are very often right. More often, they're right. They're more often righter than the pollsters actually are. And this is a depressing day, really. In a sense, I feel invigorated because the enemy is clearly there and in the clear light of day. And it's hard for people to really deny what he is, whereas they do that with other people. But at the same time, he's a real monster who lingered around the House of Commons for a long, long time through a few political parties, not just through the Labour Party, though for the longest time he was. And he was finally rooted out for issues surrounding anti-Semitism and Palestine. And he sort of just became this figure on the internet and on disreputable broadcasting agencies. I think he was on Russia Today. It's sounding increasingly cranky and crackpotish. Crackpotish. And he sort of faded away from British political life. And for him to be returning like this, and to be returning in a sense as this kind of rock star, even The Spectator, the way they put up their video about it today, had his face on it and it said, George is back. And trending on Twitter was something like, congratulations, George, where people seem to really like him. And he is a good orator, but he's an orator for evil. So this is depressing in a very meaningful way.
Yeah, and last time he was in Parliament, it was also a by-election in Bradford West, a constituency with a Muslim majority. Here, there's not a Muslim majority. He got 40% of the vote. 39.7% of eligible voters actually went to vote. So it's not that he has this great majority, but it is that's how elections work. You don't have to vote, well, depending on the country, but here you don't have to vote, and yeah, you don't need a majority. You just need to be to have more votes than others. So I want to read this. Morgan, I know you're not a fan of this idea, but George Galloway wrote, yeah, because he is evil, and sometimes making treating it as a joking matter is maybe not treating it as seriously as it should. But it's hard for me not to. So Morgan, your objection is registered, and you can elaborate on it. But he sent these two separate letters. One for white voters and one for Muslim voters. And I'm going to try to read it in something sounding like the accent of the people I think he was intending to target. So this is for the white voters. First and foremost, I believe in Britain. That's why I fought for Brexit and why I fought against Scottish independence. I believe in family. I am a father of 6 children, 5 of them still at school, and I don't like some of the things they are teaching our children. I believe in men and women. God created everything in pairs. Unlike the mainstream parties, I have no difficulty in defining what a woman is. I believe in law and order. I fight for small businesses. I'm not reading the whole thing. I'm just reading the highlights. The most amazing one at the end is, above all else, these are my goals. And then he mentions some local things. And the last one is, make Rochdale great again. I kid you not. This is in the letter. You can find it on social media. Daniel, if you want to share it somewhere, yeah, people can then see it. So that is how that's how George Galloway, um, uh, uh, yeah, that's how he tries to convince white people to vote for him. Now, this is George Galloway's letter to Muslim voters. I'm going to read some of it. Assalamu alaikum. The last 130 days have shocked the Ummah to its core. The killing of thousands of our brothers and sisters in Gaza is a war crime, and Israel must be held to account. I think that makes the point, actually. He goes on. He goes on, and I think you know, my future in acting and voiceovers is secure. Morgan, your thoughts on those letters, on my accents, or on the very fact that I read them?
I mean, you mentioned I objected, so that's all I have to say about that. As for his letters, something people should appreciate about George Galloway is that he is very cynical, and it isn't as if he's bound by some code of honor so therefore he will write these two differing letters. And so he'll say one thing to one group and he'll say one thing to another. And I think the letter that he basically sent to the Muslim voters, or the people he understood to be Muslim, is actually more reflective of his genuine opinions. And so we should understand exactly who this guy is. He isn't going to just tell the truth when he's put on the spot. So when he says things about not being an anti-Semite, but then does things that would lead you to believe that he is an anti-Semite, you should be bearing that kind of thing in mind. Something briefly about the election as well, because he did get 39.7%. He didn't get 39.7% of eligible voters, though. That's important to keep in mind. He got 39.7% of people who turned out, and the turnout was very, very low. So he actually, no, sorry, 39.7% was the turnout for the constituency, and then he got 40% of that. So that's about 9% of eligible voters overall, which is very, very low, shockingly low. The average turnout in general elections in the UK is about 67%. So I think one of the things that you can draw from that is that not only did the people who voted for him want to send a message primarily to the Labour Party, and that's how Galloway's framed it, and I think that's actually accurate, and that's certainly how Keir Starmer has taken it, that there's a message that they wanted to send about that they wanted Labour to be more hardline about Gaza, they wanted them to be more in favour of the Palestinians and more hostile to the Israelis. But also, the people who didn't come out and vote in this by-election, even though it's received immense coverage, it's not like they wouldn't know it was going on. They didn't care. They didn't care who was going to represent them. They didn't care enough to vote. So they didn't view him, and all that he's known for isn't like he's just this low-profile figure. He's very well known in British politics because he is this firebrand orator. They didn't care about that enough, and they didn't care about the anti-Semitism issue to have heard about it and to look into it and then vote against him. And that's really, really terrible. So this is a real badge of shame on the people of Rochdale.
Yeah, no, just to understand who he appeals to, here's a tweet. Here's a tweet from yesterday. If you follow me in Rochdale, get out and vote for George Galloway today. He's not perfect, but it's the best way by far to stick two fingers up to the rotten political elite and their fake news media cronies. So this is Nick Griffin. Nick Griffin was for many years the leader of the British National Party. I've mentioned the British National Party on this show in the context of when I talk about the token Jews of the anti-Israel movement. I often remind people of when a court of law forced the British National Party in the UK to accept non-white people as members. And on the first day after that was implemented, there was a black man who signed up, and of course they celebrated that fact, but clearly they don't want people who are not white. This is a white supremacist party and a white supremacist person who is if you look at his Twitter, this was not the clearest sign of support. Like he tweeted again and again about this. He's a big fan of George Galloway because they have something in common. Again, people's uh, people's hatred of Jews unites them above all of their divisions.
Yes. Well, and so Nick Griffin has been kind of out of British politics for a long time. He was a real figure of the 2000s when horrifically round about the start of the millennium and then the 2005 election, his party really started picking up traction and they started seeing results, especially in the local councils. I can't remember whether they got MPs. I want to say they didn't, but certainly
They didn't get MPs. They
yeah.
got two members of the European Parliament at some point, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And then very controversially, he was invited on BBC Question Time, and he performed so badly and was such a moron that they basically were destroyed electorally after that, in quite a famous story. And the old joke about them is, so they're the BNP, the British National Party, is that they're the British Nazi Party, because they really do brand themselves that way, and multiple of their members have been found to have been involved in right-wing terrorist organizations, have been arrested and sent to jail for actually planning terror attacks, notably one young man surrounding Durham a few years ago. So the fact that Nick Griffin is tweeting in favor of you, you can't control that per se, but it should cause you to reflect, why does Nick Griffin see what I'm saying? I think this is really good. And if there's a logical continuity between your opinions and Nick Griffin's. That is, I mean, it's the same as saying there's a logical continuity between your opinions and Hitler. That's just how bad it is. And that should really give people pause that George Galloway has just been elected back to the House of Commons.
Yeah, and the logical continuity goes further. I mean, so the party that George Galloway is the head of is called the Workers' Party of Britain. I'm looking at their Wikipedia, and the first thing it has is that, not to be confused with Socialist Workers' Party. Basically, socialist. If this was Socialist Workers' Party for Britain, it would only miss one word to basically have the same name as the Nazi Party, original one. And yeah, George Galloway, what he accuses Israel of, a massacre and so on. But the way to know that he doesn't really believe that is because George Galloway has never met a butcher he didn't like. I mean, he was buddies with Saddam Hussein. We a few days ago had a picture on a thumbnail of him and Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas. He supports Putin. He's which again is consistent. Let me remind the audience. Yeah, if you come at it with a principled point of view, whether the principles are right or wrong, yeah, if they're wrong, you will support both Russia and the Palestinians because it is in many ways essentially the same side. And if you're on the good side, you will support Israel and Ukraine. There is no two ways about it. But no, in his case, it is always the murderers that he will support. And we know this about people who support the Palestinians and make that their issue are people who are looking at the world, and what the flaw that they find is that one sliver of land in the Middle East, in a sea of savagery, the one civilized place, and of course the place where Jews live. And it's never an accident. These people considering where they're coming at it from, it is of course consistent for them to support the Palestinians. So just quickly in the video, the one video that I clicked of his, which was titled Holocaust with a small H. This was a few days ago. There was at one point he says, kind of as a side point when he's criticizing Biden, he says about the war that it's a conflict. This is a quote: conflict that has already cost the blood and lives of well over 100,000 people in 135 days. Now, of course, he says blood and lives, so maybe he means anybody who had a paper cut during this time counts. But of course, the number he is referring to, I don't know where he gets to that number, but it is without a doubt based on the number of his good buddies who did October 7th. And yeah, that's where he gets it from, Morgan.
Yeah, and so I mean, just picking up on something you were saying, it isn't like George Galloway. It's like one of the kind of people in their late teens who goes and protests in the street in favor of Gaza, who's a kind of stupid kid who's picked this up from the culture but doesn't really know any better. He's really been around for a long time and knows what he's talking about. So he knows better. And so you can't excuse this as a mistake or ignorance about something. He's been to a lot of the societies that he's speaking in favor of. He knows what they're like. He's seen it and he's thought, wow, this is a good thing. This is the ethic I would like to instill in society. And so the Workers' Party that he's founded, as I said yesterday on the show, he said, and it says, I believe on their website, was founded to, it's something like support the, or to revive the achievements or the memory of the USSR, Cuba, and China. So it's openly in favor of totalitarian communist societies, the ones which destroyed the most number of people ever in history. That is the level of evil that you're talking about here. So when it comes to his opinions about any of this stuff, you're right. There are no butchers that he's not met that he hasn't liked. So there was Saddam Hussein, who was the head of the Ba'athist Party, which was openly inspired by German National Socialism. His deputy leader, Chris Williamson, who's another reprobate, who I'm sorry to see is back in British politics again, was hosting Palestine Declassified on the Iranian Press TV with another anti-Semite professor from Bristol for a number of years. And if you ever go watch that drivel, it is just the worst anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about people secretly influencing things for Israel's benefit, just framed in the context of being anti-Zionist instead of anti-Semitic. That, as I said, that's a wonderful trick that the anti-Semites learned from 1948 onwards, is you could say anti-Zionist or anti-Israel, and therefore you can have the same conspiracy theorists, the same conspiracy theorist type language, targeting the same people who end up being Jews and persecuting them and get away with it, at least in some people's minds. So that is who this person is. That's the person who we've got back in our legislature, and it is truly awful.
Yeah, and Chris Williamson, who you mentioned, yeah, I was watching the election coverage yesterday, and all of a sudden he pops up on my screen, and he does his thing where he repeats the word genocide. Of course, as these people's minister of propaganda said, if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. Chris Williamson is somebody who tweeted on October 17th, was it that during the Al Ali Hospital incident or bombing, as they called it, immediately tweeted accusing Israel of this, and said something which he often says, which is Israel needs to be dismantled. Now, of course, when these people say dismantled, that is a kind of a legal loophole, because in the UK we have hate speech laws, and if you say look, the Jews need to be wiped off the face of the earth, that is a crime in Britain. So he managed to say what he meant without having to fully say it. And yeah, I was watching Galloway's speech. Galloway's speech, yeah, as you mentioned, he can speak. And he starts with his first words are Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer is the leader of the left-wing Labour Party in the UK, party that is heavy favorite to win the next general election. So Keir Starmer is very likely to be prime minister, by the end of the year. And he said, Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza. So Rochdale, which used to be one of the richest places in the UK, now one of the poorest, has elected their representative who says, I don't care about any of you. This is for Gaza. But why is this for Gaza, and why is it directed at Keir Starmer? Because the Labour Party is anti-Israel. Their policies, just as the Conservative Party is anti-Israel, but Labour is a bit more viciously anti-Israel, but not viciously enough. They still formally are in favor of the existence of Israel. Have even had the audacity to say that Israel has the right to defend itself. And that's unacceptable to people who want the Jews Israel to be dismantled. So yeah, George Galloway goes into his speech about that. Of course, later on he does talk a little bit about Rochdale and Rochdale Football Club and how he's going to save it. So I'm sure that is at the very top of his agenda. And yeah, there was something else, but I forgot.
Yeah, his people should go watch his speech. So because there's a number of bits in the latter point, latter part of it, which I guess are directed to his constituents, which are not really very interesting, but he does start it with this broadside against Starmer. And I think it is right, as I said, to understand this as a protest against him. Even though the turnout was very low, the other people didn't care enough to go and demonstrate the other way. So this is, I think, that Galloway's understanding of this is the right way to understand it, that this is a criticism of Starmer. And Starmer represents a move back to kind of new Labour, which is moving Labour into the centre. So they're going to violate people's rights less, they're going to steal less of their wealth, they're going to bankrupt the country slightly less through the NHS by trying to use private procurement and all these kind of things. And he sees that and he thinks, God, that's rubbish. I really like the totalitarian communism of the 20th century. We should be more like that. And so that's what he represents, and also what you were kind of saying about when they misspeak about being anti-Jew. But, oh no, I'm just anti-Israel. Perhaps a way that people who might be a bit skeptical about that could understand it is that in the UK, because in the House of Commons there isn't actually fully free speech, there is such a thing as parliamentary privilege, where certain kinds of speech are protected at times. But for example, if you impugn the honor of another member of the House, you can be thrown out. That's just one of the examples where you can be thrown out. And so a lot of MPs over time have developed ways of saying what they want to say while saying something else. So Churchill famously, so you can't call someone a liar, very famously. If you say that someone has been dishonest, that will get you thrown out of the House because you have to retract it. And Churchill famously coined the phrase that an honorable member is guilty of terminological inexactitude as a way of saying that someone else was lying, right? And so when it comes to these people, yeah, they're anti-Zionist, they're anti-Israel. When they're anti-Semites, there might be people in the world, and so I don't consider myself a Zionist, for example, but I don't think you could mistake me for being, I want Israel to exist. I don't want it wiped off the face of the earth, whereas Galloway very clearly does. And why is there a difference between me and him? It's because it's anti-Semitism. People, don't be suckered in by this stuff.
Christopher Smith says, I hate Israel has the right to defend itself. Patronizing to Israel, in my opinion, who doesn't have the right to defend themselves? It's a no-brainer. Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's not that is what people say when they're not really when they don't really mean it. Because when they do mean it, they don't say that. They encourage. They'll say, I support Israel fighting this war in order to win it. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Thank you, James Valiant. James says, asks, does his victory have any implication for the next general election? That's a good question. I mean, the way elections work in the UK, we don't know when exactly it is. It's completely on the Prime Minister. He calls it, and then it's 3 weeks later. People were expecting it to be in the spring. I think now the expectation is it'll be in the fall, because right now he's going to lose big time, and maybe in the fall he's going to lose a little bit less. Legally, it has to be by January of next year. Yeah, by-elections are different. This one especially because Labour abandoned their candidate at some point because he, again, was a bit too anti-Semitic for them by saying that Israel allowed October 7th to happen. So, but at the time that they parted ways with him, it was too late for them. He was still on the ballot as Labour. It was too late for them to run their own candidate. It's not too late for them to run their own candidate in the general election, so they will have a candidate. How many people will show up to vote? It's probably going to be more than 39.7. I don't know. I mean, the fact is he's going to be in Parliament for a few months, and yeah, then he's going to run in the general election. Where I think it will have an impact, and Morgan, you probably know more about this than me, but and he certainly thinks it's going to have an impact, is right now on British politics, on how Labour goes into the next general election, what they think about Keir Starmer. Has been certainly not as bad as the previous Labour leader, although that's not very difficult. But he is, he's not super principled. Let's put it lightly. So it could be that if he sees votes slipping away, I don't know. We'll see when he starts to use words like genocide and so on.
Yeah, I think probably this will have an effect on the general election. It's not certain. So Rochdale has consistently voted left since at least 2005. Interestingly, before that, they had a huge history of voting for Liberal candidates. Some of them not so nice, like Cyril Smith, who's probably one of the most evil MPs who's ever existed. But as I say, Richard Cobden was there. So they actually have the Liberal Democrat should have done well in his constituency, but since 2005, they voted hugely for Labour. And the thing about this, as you say, is that Azhar Ali wasn't able to really stand under the Labour banner, although he was on the ballot under the Labour name, but Labour had disavowed him. So he still got something like 8% of the vote, but he was, it destroyed his chances. And a way in which we could be optimistic about this is that really in the UK, the two-party system does reign supreme. So there are other examples like this where there are by-elections and either someone has been kicked out of their party, so they're the independent candidate, or they join this rebel party, which they can do once they've won the seat, they can join any party they like, and then it counts as that party's seat. And then when it comes round to the next general election, they get squashed again because they've left the party which people really wanted them for. Now, it's notable that in this by-election, he still won anyway. And it's plausible, I think, that actually he could have defeated Azhar Ali. I don't know it for certain, but it's plausible that he could have done or come very close. And so it's possible that at the next general election, people will just go back and vote Labour and he'll be gone. And happy days, that would be great. But also, he's a very dedicated constituency MP in lots of ways. He'll really go around, knock on doors, meet people, be very charming, press flesh and christen babies, whatever. And it's plausible that he could get the people to like him, and therefore he could stay. So I don't know for certain, but I think it's very plausible that he could still be in 6 months' time.
Yeah, very charming. I mean, if he tells white people, things that some might consider transphobic, and then goes to he basically if he'll tell you whatever you have to say, I'm pretty sure he won't do that for the Jewish voters, although I don't know if there are many in Rochdale. But yeah, for our non-UK viewers, election night in the UK is very different from anything in the US and in Israel, the two other countries where I follow elections. When I first saw a US election, it was a UK election, it was interesting. It's different, so there's 635 constituencies. Each one is a seat in parliament. Whoever has the majority, the leader of that party is prime minister. And when each constituency has their results, they have in the, I'm guessing, council building, they have the returning officer on stage reading out how many votes each one got, and behind him are all the candidates on stage. I think this is why British politics has this things like the monster raving loony party, which is basically something that is kind of a joke about politics, and they always dress funny and so on. And whenever in constituencies where there's the party leader, a bunch of more of these like there are different weird people on stage, because it's an opportunity for them to get on stage and do something weird. So yesterday, while George Galloway is up there, so the returning officer reads the results, then he invites George Galloway to make a speech. George Galloway makes a speech. At some point, somebody starts shouting him down, and this is some environmentalist woman in the audience. And at the same time, a candidate who's on stage with him tries to throw, what was it? Orange, it was confetti, right? It wasn't paint this
I
time.
can't remember, something like
On
that.
George Galloway, and I don't know if I'm offending any of George Galloway's voters by saying he throws like a woman. The guy who that's a joke, people. But yeah, he missed, and he's right there on stage with him. So not a good day for the environmentalists either. Although when they uh, when they interrupt something, I think that's all they're there for. Yeah.
My final point would just be there isn't a notable Jewish population in Rochdale, but Rochdale is in the Greater Manchester area, and it's in the sort of northeast of Manchester, right? But in the north of Manchester, there is a very notable Jewish population. So outside, most Jews in the UK are concentrated around London, but outside of London, probably the most notable Jewish population is in northern Manchester. And there's a quite isolated Hasidic community who's very insular, who all live together and so on, who I interacted with a lot when I worked in Manchester, because I was working in a vaccination centre, so I saw them all coming in for their jabs. Part of the reporting in the UK press today has been that this is a dark day for a lot of British Jews because of what Galloway represents. And if I were one of these people living in North Manchester, I would feel really not very secure, because of that town is just over there and they don't see a problem with a lot of the anti-Semitism that's going on, or they turn a blind eye to it. So that would be worrying if I were in their situation.
There's some good trolling comments that of course we will read as we do on Sundays on the reality show Extra. Trolls, if you want your comment read, keep commenting. It's good for the algorithm. And if you want to see your comment read, you will have to pay us. Yeah, we're greedy people. You need to become a member of this YouTube channel. The reality show Extra is for YouTube members and members of ARC UK. That is Sunday at 6. Right now it's 6. It is 6 p.m. UK time. We are going to wrap this up, and we're gonna start the reality show where we will be talking about Israel's disillusioned left. I'm sure we're going to talk about George Galloway again, unfortunately. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks Morgan for joining, and we'll see you in a minute.
See you later.